Hi, welcome back to Plan9Crunch. I'm Joe Gibson, and every week we read from a culture genre novel. Today I have brought The Devil's Brood by David Jacobs. I found this at a used bookstore a while back that has since gone out of business, and though this was a $6.99 US when it released in 2000, on the aftermarket, I have seen prices ranging anywhere between $25 and $700. As I understand it, this is a series that doesn't actively publish more installments. And this is the second installment of a Universal Monsters revival, essentially. The first was by Jeff Rovin. That was Return of the Wolfman. That is even harder to find. And then there was a sequel to this one by David Jacobs that I also have not been able to find. I had the most interest probably in the Return of the Wolfman, but at this point, while I have Frank Delastrito's Wolfman book and the 2010 Wolfman book, I don't really have a need for Jeff Rovin's Wolfman book. But I've read this a few times, once when I was probably too young to be reading it. There's a lot of stuff in this novel that happens that I probably can't say on this YouTube page without a good deal of tact and innuendo. And that's the main thing that stood out upon the recent reread of this. It's definitely not Hazian, though it is still drawing from movies such as the Universal Monsters, of course, also Black Cat. I think that's the cult that Maria commands in this. And I think the zombies are probably derived from White Zombie. But of course they do some other stuff in here that I don't know. For me, coming from growing up watching the Universal Monsters films, many of which had the Hays Code in force while they were making it, I don't really associate Universal Monsters with the kinds of characters in this book and the kind of stuff that they do in this book. But I also don't really want to pearl clutch, and I understand that that kind of stuff is, in many cases, as terrifying or more terrifying. It just depends on the skill of the writer. And David Jacobs does a good job, but this is going for a more pulpy action-adventure. It's very different from the classic Universal films. Dracula spends most of this book, click off if you don't want spoilers, as a giant slug. The Wolfman's not in this book. If this is anybody, this is Wilfred Glendon III, who Maria is trying to get to become her werewolf slave, and then the mummy's not even in this book. The Dracula slug is pretty cool. I guess it's sort of like, if you've seen Jason Goes to Hell, but more of a larger slug. A larger, he's like a large monster, because he's trying to feed on like the Frankenstein monster's belly flute. It doesn't really matter. That was sort of a constraint set by Return of the Wolfman, which had Larry Talbot finally kill Dracula. And that's sort of how this starts. Because Maria's cult, she's a much more evil character, Maria Zaleska, in this novel than probably she should be. She starts this by watching, essentially, that fight. I don't know when in the book, Return of the Wolfman, that takes place, but let's just find that. We'll read from page... we'll start on page 13. A man-like thing, gigantic, 7 feet tall, with a square-topped head and the face of an animated corpse. It lumbered toward the mausoleum, as rude a caricature of the human form as any had ever been scratched on a lavatory wall. A section of fence that got in the way was trampled down, kicked aside like cardboard by gunboat-sized, hobnailed boots. A huge strangler's hand gripped a tree branch for support, showing stitched on the wrist, where it had been sewn onto the rest of the arm. Its weight was too heavy and tore the branch off the tree. Okay, so far it's good prose. I like the description. It's also pretty true to what the characters, at least in Universal's depiction, would look like. This is Frankenstein's monster, obviously, which Maria announces in a second, and then they mention Henry Frankenstein. I'm not sure if this part was in Return of the Wolfman. I'm not sure if I'm reading Rovin's prose here. I think it's similar enough to the way that the descriptions happen later in the book to say that this is still David Jacobs, but they describe that the monster's injured. And let's see, there's a wolf pack. Right. They had pointed ears, glowing eyes, and slavering fanged mouths. They burst out of nowhere, a half dozen or so, silently charging the monster, going in for the kill. He threw himself forward, meeting them head on, wielding the broken tree branch, which he still clutched, using it as a club. He swatted down one wolf, then the others were upon him. The pack savaged him, their thrusting, fanged snouts slashing everywhere, ripping and tearing. The monster wrung the neck of one and broke the back of another, but the survivors were getting stronger while he grew weaker. And that's also very interesting to visualize, though, again, you couldn't do that in an old Universal movie. So it feels weird for, like, the purist part of me. Though I still like the novel. I've reread this multiple times. Let's see. Let's skip ahead, because I mainly want to talk about the Wolfman and Dracula. Reacting to some unseen cue, the wolves suddenly all jerked their heads up at the same time, turning them in the direction from which the stimulus had come. There, at the edge of the graveyard, a figure emerged from behind a tall, tilted obelisk-shaped monument. Stepping into view was a devil in the shape of a man, tall, powerfully built, deep-chested, and long-limbed. A vigorous adult male, in the prime of, not life, but undeath. His glossy black hair was slicked back in a widow's peak, his skin was dead white, and his facial expression was one of supreme arrogance and hatefulness. His eyes were blood-red and glowing like Maria's, only hotter and brighter. He was a thirsty corpse in an old-fashioned formal wear, with a black dinner jacket and pants and stiff white shirt front, wrapped within a scarlet cummerbund and a scarlet-lined black cape that trailed him like bat wings. He gestured curtly, and the wolf scattered, trotting off. He gloated over the fallen monster, sneering, bearing a leering fanged mouth, hungrier and infinitely more feral than those of the wolves. Dracula, Gregor, he's one of the cultists, a voice was thick with outrage. The mad fool, only he could destroy such a priceless creation. But why, someone asked. I thought the monster was his slave. There's an asterisk here and says, see Return of the Wolfman from Berkeley Boulevard Books. Which reminds me of the way that comic issues will not link to each other, but will reference each other through text boxes. And I've talked before about how things like the Monster Times and Famous Monsters of Filmland, or the Cult Monster magazines, they sort of unite comic fandoms with these cult fandoms, with the kaiju fandoms, with the Universal Monsters fandoms. So it's all related. And I think that's neat. And here's a bit of the fight scene. But Dracula was off balance and the Wolfman had the momentum. The lycanthrope grabbed two clawed fistfuls of Dracula's front and lifted him up so that his feet were off the floor. He swung him around. Dracula kicking empty air, groping for the Wolfman's throat, but unable to reach it. So naturally, I've kind of already spoiled. Wolfman wins this fight and goes on to have his own novel. Not in this one. But what they do with Dracula is interesting as he recovers. I already mentioned that. Steve Soto is our, I guess, point of view character as he interacts with Dorian and Dr. Lodge, and there's some good intrigue there. I really don't want to spoil too much of their plotline. I know I've already spoiled the monster stuff, but if you read this novel, you're going to have to be invested in Steve Soto, more so than Dracula, who's a slug, and Frankenstein's monster, who also recovers. It's an interesting book. I'd recommend it if you can find it. The issue is, again, but between $25 and $700. Anyway, let us know if you want us to do a more in-depth breakdown of this book, because we have it. It's a good book. I like it. Every week here we read from a genre novel. If you would like to see more of that, subscribe so you don't miss our videos. And turn on notification thing if that helps as well. And we also have a Facebook page and a TikTok page and a conventional blog, Plan9Crunch.com, where we have a lot of stuff as well. Thank you all for watching, and that's a wrap.